Welcome to our video on the topic of dyslexia. We are all special education candidates from the 2018 cohort at Pacific University, a small liberal arts college outside of Portland, Oregon. As part of our academic interventions and special education course, we've all read a book on the topic of dyslexia, and today we will be sharing with you what we've learned. As we get started, we're going to introduce ourselves and the book we read. So hi, my name is Helena Scalata. I have worked with both high schoolers and middle schoolers in a life skills room, as well as some adults also who are severely impacted by their disabilities, and with behavior, students in a behavior program as well. I have read Overcoming Dyslexia by Dr. Sally Shaywitz. She is a professor of pediatrics at Yale University School of Medicine and the co-director of the Yale Center for the Study of Learning and Attention. This book was really aimed at parents, and so this book would be great for them. Although I have reservations as a teacher about the contents of some of it. One of the things that I learned about from this book, it had a lot of good information on different accommodations and what dyslexia really looks like, especially in higher functioning students. So that was nice to have those delineated.
All right, hello, I'm Andrew Hutchins. I started off working as an instructional assistant at the beginning of the year, and about halfway through the year I got a job as a teacher at a behavior school, working with 6th through 12th graders, pretty small school, about 30 students in total. The book I read was right here. It's called Unlocking Literacy, Effective Decoding and Spelling Instruction by Marcia Henry. So a little bit about the author. She has about 50 years of experience in working as a teacher, tutor, professor, and she is frequently asked to go to colleges, universities, just big conventions and talk about literacy and a little bit about dyslexia. I think one thing I took away from the book, and was very important to me, I think, was basically that English is always made out to be such a complicated language, and she had the point that it's not a language of exceptions, but it's a stable and learnable language. So, yep.
Hi, I'm Chuck Erkenbeck, and I started this year working in a hospital setting where I've been for 6 years, working with hospitalized children with acute pediatric conditions. And I have 10 years working in a private setting with 2 boys with autism. And I read this book, Essentials of Assessing, Preventing, and Overcoming Reading Difficulties by David Kilpatrick. David Kilpatrick is a professor of psychology at the University of New York College at Cortland. He's also been practicing school psychology and been a school psychologist for 27 years, and he's conducted well over 1,000 evaluations of students with reading difficulties. One of the things I learned from this book was that state testing doesn't always give the big picture and can sometimes mask a student's weaknesses in reading.
Hello, I'm Amy Moylan, and I started working with children with disabilities about 25 years ago, working with a young boy with autism. And then I became a behavior consultant and worked with many children over the years, including my master's thesis in psychology was on teaching children with autism to read using a computer-assisted program. So I've done some work in reading in the past. I also have 4 children and I taught all of them to read. So I've been home with them for a while, and currently I've been working as a substitute instructional assistant. And here I am in my master's program, another master's program. I read the book, Speech to Print by Louisa Cook Moats. She has been a teacher, a psychologist, a researcher, a graduate school faculty member, consultant, and the author of many varieties of literature on the topics of reading, spelling, language, and teacher preparation. She has a BA degree from Wellesley, an MA from Peabody College of Vanderbilt University, and a doctorate in reading and human development from Harvard Graduate School of Education. It's a great read for those who are teachers or any type, it could be a general educator or a special educator. Also would be helpful for speech language pathologists, educational psychologists, and anyone else who's interested in language development. So if you're interested in teaching, reading, or writing, this book would be essential to have on your bookshelf.
I am Amber Lane, and my experience with students so far has been as an instructional assistant in a variety of different K through 12 settings for students with special needs in resource room, life skills classrooms, and structured learning centers. And the book that I read was Dyslexia, Dysgraphia, LLD, and Dyscalculia by Virginia Berninger, and she is a professor and research affiliate in the Educational Psychology Center on Human Development and Disability at the University of Washington, and Beverly J. Wolfe, and she is the director of Slingerland Institute for Literacy. And this book would really be great for a great read for educators who are in need of assessment resources that are necessary for intervention. And one of the things that I learned from this book was that oftentimes teachers and classmates can fail to recognize that dyslexia doesn't have anything to do with a lack of motivation or effort, that in fact they often spend considerably longer on assignments, even though they may not produce the same results as their peers. They may be working harder than anyone else in the class.
All right, so the first thing on our agenda to talk about today is the definition.
David Kilpatrick, author of Essentials of Assessing, Preventing, and Overcoming Reading Difficulties, he believes that dyslexia is a psychological and medical condition. It's not an educational condition. It's a condition where an individual struggles with word reading despite adequate effort and instruction, so it's not based on a child's effort, as mentioned before. There's no standard for precisely, it's a word reading skills deficit, and these skills need to be in order to be considered dyslexic. So it's a situation where a child may have the comprehension on the material, but just doesn't have the reading fluency and can't form those words as quickly as most. Do you have anything to add on that?
My book actually talked about some of the historical roots as well. There was Samuel T. Orton. He was an American psychiatrist and neurologist. He expanded the early work of dyslexia, and it was based on his clinical observations. So this was, did I say about 1925? I think around 1925. He came up with, or he noted 5 different kinds of learning disorders. The first one was developmental dyslexia, without word reading or word blindness. And it's the inability to read in a way consistent with mental age or other academic skills that is not due to visual or motor disturbance in seeing or copying letter or words. And also the second one is developmental word deafness, the inability to identify sounds correctly and understand spoken language despite adequate hearing. And special disability in writing, motor speech delay, and stuttering.
Was there anything else you had? Was that it, Amber?
That was it for the historical roots.
My book really didn't, it touched on dyslexia a few times throughout the book. It really didn't define it. It referred to a specific learning disability, and usually it would have parentheses dyslexia as well. So yeah, it didn't really define it. It just kind of talked about learning disabilities, and it was just more focused on the reading aspect than the disabilities, so yeah.
My book never mentioned dyslexia a single time, but it was about developing readers in general, and it did mention struggling readers and how to teach kids effectively how to read.
Yeah.
Kilpatrick talks about dyslexia a fair amount, and he says that there's a mystique about it. People are misinformed about dyslexia. It really simply refers to poor word level reading. Speculations about visual and spatial perceptual deficits are inconsistent with all the research done on it.
Do we have anything else to add for the definition of dyslexia? Are we all comfortable moving on from that?
Yeah.
I do, but I can't find it. And
We'll get back to it.
Yeah. We'll come back and touch on the last definition we have for dyslexia, and we'll move on.
So Amber, I heard you talk about the historical roots, and Shaywitz also touches on that. Oh, I'm so messed up. Okay. Never mind.
Did it come from before 1925,
Yes,
before the
yes.
early development, when they were starting
Yes.
to expand on the early development?
So there's there are two individuals who kind of simultaneously had dyslexic patients, and one of them was a congenitally dyslexic person, and the other one had an accident, and that caused the dyslexia to happen. So the first one, so this is 1896, was Dr. W. Pringle Morgan of Seaford in Britain. He had a 14-year-old who he described, and all the symptoms is basically classic dyslexia from a developmental
Delayed or
Delayed.
are you looking for delayed?
Yes, I am, thank you. And then simultaneously, a German physician,
It's in there somewhere.
Is it the German neurologist Karl Warner? No.
Well, while you're checking, I can.
During the
Thank you.
autopsy?
Oh, you've got it, okay.
Oh, I don't know if it's the same person.
I was just gonna say that there's basically three main types of reading difficulties: dyslexia, hyperlexia, and then a mixed type of reading difficulty that combines both of those. But dyslexia, folks read with adequate, as I mentioned before, language comprehension.
Yeah.
And the hyperlexia folks, they read at a level above what they understand. So they're kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, and then there's folks that have difficulties in both areas. Those are our lowest readers.
So with the first one, they have good accuracy and fluency?
Not the
Comprehension.
dyslexic folks can read with comprehension. They
They
just
read with
can't read with accuracy and fluency.
The other one
But
was
the hyperlexia, it's the other way around.
Don't have the comprehension.
They just don't have the
Don't have
they
the
can
comprehension,
read,
but they can
Way
they can
beyond
pass
grade
fast
level.
reading tests,
Yeah.
but they just can't comprehend.
Hmm.
You might
What
go
they're
back and ask
reading.
them, and they're not even sure what they read. They were just
Yeah.
reading.
Go ahead, Ellen.
Okay, so Shaywitz on page 49 says that speaking is natural, but reading is not. And the point that she was trying to make was that we are wired to speak, right? We've been speaking ever since, humans have had speech. I don't know, that's exact. Well, but I don't know if like cavemen were using.
They were using some
grunted and,
similar
they have-
styles. I mean, they might not be perfect.
Right, I mean,
They
that's
have
They
their-
have their own speech.
I don't
they have their
know.
own speech.
But we've been speaking a lot longer than we have reading, and so reading is this arbitrary system of letters that we put together, and then we are taught how to decipher it, decode it, and read through the 5 components of reading. But we haven't been doing it for very long, and so it's not really in our genetic code.
Mhm.
My initial knee-jerk reaction was just like, is this helpful? Like, we have people who, for whom speaking is not natural. I mean, it's natural, like, they're supposed to be that way, but they communicate differently, right? They're wired differently. There's something that's different about them than about a lot of the other people in the population. And so is saying, like, speaking is something that everybody should have, reading is something that only a lot of people have. Like, is that really, like, I feel like it's downplaying other disabilities, or is it like, is Shaywitz trying to determine why specific learning disability, why dyslexia, which it would be in that category, is the highest prevalence category of special education? Any thoughts?
Do you think determining dyslexia might be an issue with the prevalence and figuring out how, I mean, it's not easy to just look at somebody and say this person has dyslexia, doing certain tests.
Well, I'm looking at our diagram here. There's, we know that the brain forms differently in a dyslexic person, and that they are able to decipher word analysis and find reasoning and find meaning. But
right, so when you originally learn a word or learning reading, it lights up different parts of your brain, and so you have Broca's area, which I believe is in the front, and the parieto-temporal, which is back here, and then also the occipital temporal, which is for the word form back here. And when you first learn to read, it's all in Broca's area. It's all in the front, and so like they've done MRIs to see where your brain lights up when you're learning to read, and it's all there. And for a dyslexic, that never moves into like fluency automatic to connect the back of your brain and the front of your brain. And I know that for autism, right, there's a lack of connectivity between the front and the back of the brain. And so, I mean, and also it was, Shaywitz was also saying that the people who do the best in society who have dyslexia are the ones who have a very specific interest. And this, to me, I immediately thought of autistic savants. I was talking to Dr. Suchi Parker, our professor, and he was saying how this also is similar to hyperfocus for ADHD.
Yeah, they pick something they like and everything else doesn't matter. They only like focus on one area and they lack in so many different areas.
And
The
repetition.
organization,
Yeah,
there's
like-
a lack of organization, or they're over, I don't know how that.
And I know this is kind of off topic, but she was kind of talking about the student succeeding versus not succeeding. And I think, Amy, you had talked about issues with students succeeding, like maybe, sorry to put you on the spot, but just, I think you talked about a little bit like students that aren't able to read have issues later on in life, like, you know, not graduating, ending up in jail, things like that, which, you know, is maybe not seen right away with dyslexia, but down the road, that can be a big issue because they're not figuring that out right away, and then down the road, those issues from the beginning are basically making that,
Yeah, the stat I had was that, this is from my book, 5 Moats, that the rate of functional illiteracy in Washington, D.C. is 37%, and many of those people are unable to hold a job as a result. And the stats show that poor readers are more likely to drop out of school, end up in jail, struggle to find and keep meaningful work. And there's even just some basic skills that, another stat said 14% of American adults are unable to perform basic functional reading tasks such as reading medicine labels or train schedules. So it makes it very difficult to go about your everyday life if you are unable to read basic information.
And I think a student or a person with dyslexia, if they don't have materials that interest them, they're not gonna ever wanna.
And it starts very early.
Yeah.
I mean, this can all be, we can have an intervention early in life, and it has to do with the exposure to words and to reading and to speech. And a lot of children that aren't getting those things, or we don't intervene fast enough.
Well, and going back to what Andrew was saying about the prevalence, it makes me wonder how much of this is actually occurring. I know the prevalence
Yeah.
of dyslexic students with dyslexia is fairly high, but how are the schools able to address it that in an effective way?
Yeah.
And
The instructional strategies,
Yeah.
and the interventions, you know, where they start, and is it too late or is it too early? So,
With Shaywitz basically wants them to start as early as possible. And there are markers that she pointed out that should be like kind of red flags for a parent to try to get an initial evaluation before, because usually kids tend to be identified around 3rd grade when they have problems with reading. And the teacher has tried intervention, but it hasn't worked up to that point. So they've given it the college try, and then they're like, okay, we've really tried. I hate to stigmatize this child by putting him in special ed, or response to intervention, starting on the track to special education. So they have exhausted all their resources by that point, and they're ready to say like, okay, this kid can't get farther behind. But by that point, they were already like significantly behind their peers. And so Shaywitz wants kids to be identified as soon as possible. And
does she give parents tips for early identification?
yes, which is what I'm trying to find now.
So I hate to jump ahead a little bit, but I'm gonna jump ahead because it's related to fluency and talking about interventions. Sorry for jumping forward, but
No, please.
The author talked about in my book, Henry, that she emphasizes a lot on interventions for fluency by 2nd grade and 3rd grade for strategies for decoding and spelling, because those become more efficient and students will acquire greater fluency. So being able to basically identify 2nd, 3rd grade and then putting them in the right intervention program will really help them succeed with fluency.
So by the end of kindergarten, your child should reach these milestones. They should know that words come apart and that letters represent sounds. They can name uppercase and lowercase letters. They can write the letters of the alphabet. They're beginning to learn about letter-sound matches. They are beginning to decode simple words, starting to recognize some common sight words. They're able to use invented spelling, so it's not like the proper English spelling, but it's like their sounded out version, and you can kind of figure out what it is if you try to sound it out. Demonstrate print conventions. So like if you read left to right or and top to bottom, this book is not upside down. Vocabulary is growing, and they enjoy reading or being read to.
My author also stressed, not with students with dyslexia, but just in general, that students by the 1st grade level should be learning about morphology, which is the breaking apart of words, and gave quite a few lesson suggestions to work with in the younger grades.
Well, I mean, I was taught in phonics, and I don't know if all of you were, but, and that's, a system for approaching reading, focusing on the relationship between letters and sounds. And that helps a lot with sounding out unfamiliar words. I mean, these children have enough difficulty with expanding their set of sight words. Now we're asking them to become familiar with words that have irregular spellings or are unfamiliar to them.
And Shaywitz does say that it's unfair to test kids on spelling words that they can't read. Like that just means backwards.
Yeah.
Which is a good point.
Yeah. So I think we need to focus up a little bit and get back on the.
Yeah, you
I was
wanna-
gonna say, I
I
can
think-
move ahead to.
I think the 5 components of reading,
5 components,
we
alright.
gotta get to the core and
Okay.
the core spot, and it starts with Kilpatrick, was that?
Kilpatrick talked about phonemic awareness. It's an awareness of sounds, phonemes in spoken words. He says it represents the most precise subcategory of phonological awareness. Letters are designed to represent spoken phonemes. A phenome awareness is the type of phonological awareness essential for reading. Sounds like a lot of big words there. Those who focus on reading know those terms are very important. Anything else to say on phonemic awareness?
My book actually touched on types of activities for phonemic awareness, and one of the first things it talked about was listening to the sequence of sounds. So like the teacher will start off by saying, like scratching, cutting, scissors, basic household items the teacher will talk about, and then because the students will be hearing the word, and then it moves on to a thing they call nonsense, which is children close their eyes and go ahead, you guys can do it if you want.
All right.
And the teacher tells a story, and then so if I say like, today we went to the grocery store and I had a lot of fun, and then I'm going to read the story, but I'm going to change it. Today we went to the grocery store and it was horrible. Can you guys tell me what word I changed, or what if there was a different word from the beginning?
Fun to horrible.
Fun to horrible.
Yeah, so fun to horrible. So basically, the teacher would be doing something similar to that with a story, but having more distinctive words and changing those words in and out. So that's kind of what the main point was touched on for phonemic awareness. I'm not sure, Helen, did you have anything, or?
I like that. Actually makes the kids listen to the oral language and
Yeah.
pick up on the differences.
Yeah.
The main thing I have is that's phonology. I have something to add to phonemic or phonics.
Did we already touch on the deficit hinders reading? Yeah? Was that you, Chuck? Or no, was that Shaywitz? Who is that?
That's me.
Is Helen.
So you hinders, children should learn and develop phonological awareness. So,
Well, what I'm seeing here, what I've got some notes on is that Kilpatrick talks about how word reading is a short-term memory connection, and the long-term memory connection is word comprehension. There's overlap there, but obviously the folks that are having dyslexic problems are having short-term memory problems.
So I have kindergarten is when children learn phonological awareness and decoding, and then I have steps to phonological awareness. So there's awareness of rhymes, and then teach children that rhymes can be taken apart. They work on words, so taking apart, they take words apart and put them back together. Blending, they push sounds together and to create words. Segmenting, they pull apart the word sounds. Separating words into syllables. So syllables are the largest unit of a sound in a word, and children can learn how to count the syllables of a word by clapping. I'm sure you all learned the syllable method, which is very interesting to teach to kids with severe disabilities, by the way.
sorry to interrupt you, but was the other one that we learned, was that for the syllable?
Oh, that was the cat, like, you're gonna pet the cat.
Oh, and,
Or was that for
See,
adding words?
that'd be for
It's
blending,
blending.
Yeah, blending sounds.
which is
sorry.
phonics.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, it's for phonics. Yes, and then separating syllables into phonemes. This is difficult for beginning readers and children with dyslexia, and one strategy is to have kids play sound matching games. So like, you could have, for say, cards, and you have an A and then an apple, and then you say, oh, that first sound matches the name of this thing. Yeah.
All right, well, sweet. I think we've kind of touched on that, right?
You want to talk about the fluency tasks?
So,
Did we do phonics?
I think I touched a little bit on there, but my author really, the thing that she just kept harping was really decoding and comprehension is the most important thing, which is hard because different people believe different things are more important. I'm not sure where you guys stand on decoding and comprehension, but I think there's multiple steps that need to be in place rather than just two.
Well, so Shaywitz, and I'm going to turn this so maybe you guys can see on top there. Shaywitz divides the language system into two main groups. So there's discourse, syntax, and semantics, which go into comprehension, and then
Phonology.
thank you, which goes into decoding. So that does fit here, although
Yeah.
Shaywitz also keeps the 5 components of reading.
Yeah, I mean, the author definitely doesn't just take them all out, but she just, those things are just kind of her belief and her mission behind, reading and unlocking literacy. So, are we on phonics? Or have we covered fluency?
Fluency, I can talk about the types of fluency tasks. Kilpatrick goes over that pretty extensively. There's 4 functional types of fluency tasks. Number 1 is RAN, or it's rapid automized naming, and that could be of digits, letters, objects, colors, where a child just drills through it and has to rapidly name these automized naming pieces, for lack of a better term. Word fluency, word level fluency, that's real and nonsense words. Then they move on to sentence level fluency, and finally passage level fluency. And those are the 4 areas that he focused on.
I know I kind of touched on this earlier, but I was kind of jumping ahead about fluency in my book was how the author is emphasizing the 2nd and 3rd grade interventions, kind of what I talked about earlier. So making sure that the interventions earlier is better, and they'll increase the fluency later on in life.
And Kilpatrick talks about the route to reading fluency, and it starts with letter sound knowledge. Then you add in phonological blending, and that's what we're finding is a big problem with a lot of kids with dyslexia, is the blending part. Those things produce the phonic decoding that we talked about.
Yeah.
And then phonic decoding combined with phonemic awareness leads to a stronger sight vocabulary, and then stronger sight vocabulary in turn produces instant word reading, which you need in fluency, so that turns into passage fluency. So it's a number of steps involved with that. Do you want to talk about vocabulary a little bit?
Sure, I would love to talk about vocabulary.
Are we way in the table now?
So-
You guys get to backload the rest of this discussion.
Yeah.
So Moats believes that teaching how spoken and written language work helps to give students tools to decipher and generate the written word. She also believes that many children who are struggling to read and write would do better if taught to understand the systems that underlie the English language. This includes sounds, spellings, meaningful networks, sentences, and text organization. She starts by talking about the Anglo-Saxon roots, Latin, and Greek. She says there's different layers of English. Our language comes from all of those. And she shows a general sequence that she feels that all children should move through in order to understand and organize in their minds all of these morphemes in spelling and vocabulary. So all 3 of those language roots, have different rules that govern them. They have different prefixes, they have different suffixes, different root words, different inflections, silent letters are different, and sounds are different. So because each of the language bases has different rules that dictate the word, then the word is pronounced differently or written differently. And this is in large part why she says our English language is so complex and it's difficult for children to comprehend. So,
Didn't we read that English is the most
The most
difficult
complex.
language
Yeah.
of all the languages?
Which is weird because my author tries to reiterate that it's not a complicated language, so it's kind of like back and forth.
different sides.
Yeah.
But she really believes that by teaching the roots, the prefixes, and the suffixes, a child's vocabulary can expand exponentially. They'll have the ability to take apart words and put together words and create new words and kind of figure words out for themselves. And that it's a valuable life skill. So she puts it in as it's beneficial to any child, and all children should learn this from a young age, like
Yeah.
1st grade. But I think that it would obviously be beneficial to a child with dyslexia as well, to give them some tools and some word building skills.
Can I derail you for a
Yeah.
second? So in our class, we learned a little bit about uncovering the logic of English, which is a comprehensive program for teaching learning that uses a lot, like teaches a lot of phonics and phonemic awareness, and it tries to say that there's English, most of the exceptions that we say are exceptions are not actually exceptions, but like you guys were saying, they make sense in other languages, and English has sort of commandeered those, so if you break it back down to where it came from and applied those rules, there's a lot less exceptions.
Mm-hmm. True.
How does that work with both of your books, since both of you had sort of differing opinions, or your books had differing opinions?
So basically, like I was talking about, was instead of, my book is, it was great for learning styles and tasks and different things, but it didn't really say why it's like not complicated. It just basically just gave so many rules in all the procedures that you have, rather than saying this exception. It just basically went through every single piece to touch on, instead of trying to complicate people more.
Well, I can speak to, I'm jumping ahead a tiny bit, but I'm gonna speak to the gap between the research, because he did a lot of research, and the practice. And I mentioned earlier that, I mean, one of the big assessment tools we use is the Woodcock-Johnson.
Yeah.
And that combines 3 different skills: word identification, fluency, and reading comprehension. And if you get a strong score in one of those areas, it can mask the weakness. It can kind of level things off, and you don't look to be as weak a reader as you are. So,
Or the other way around, you could have a low score and be.
that's true too.
In
Yeah.
fact, my author says something similar to that in saying that the more vocabulary a child knows, there's a direct relationship with an increased reading comprehension. Good readers know more words and are better at deciphering the meaning of new words as they read. And in turn, it's just like a snowball, they comprehend better because they know more words. So unfortunately, the converse is also true.
Yeah.
But she does offer some very specific ideas on teaching vocabulary. She says that words should be chosen to support a theme that the students are studying, so that it can apply directly to what they're doing or what they're learning, and then that will increase retention if it's learned in a meaningful context. And she also said that words should be taught in relation to other words that they already know. It's kind of like building their schemas. They should have relationships, which also gives the words more meaning. And then she said a wide and varied selection of books, nonfiction, fiction, all different subjects, gives children exposure to a very wide variety of vocabulary, and that the majority of words that a child learns come from actually reading. So then that just makes me think, like, totally going on a side trail, but if you have a child that doesn't like to read, and most of the words that they learn come from reading,
Yeah,
it's
where
kind of
they- where
that
they get-
snowball effect
yeah,
in
where they
the
get
wrong
it.
direction. Go ahead, no.
Shaywitz was talking about how to, like how important it was to get kids to do reading for fun. And basically it was like, you have them read at a level that is really easy for them, so that they do pick up those extra words. So like, whereas you're teaching at a slightly challenging level, when you send them home and they're like, go read this fun book, like there should be like really not a lot of challenges, so that they can build their vocabulary.
Kind of going off your question at more detail, I guess, is she kind of had, like, Amy would talk about that layering of the Anglo-Saxon, the Greek, the Latin, and she basically broke it down. And so like Greek is usually like words like, mostly used in science, like, hemisphere, microsphere, microscope, psychology, or physics and all that, physiology. And then Anglo-Saxon, the common words we see most time in the day. So basically trying to teach the students each rule and where those words come from, instead of trying to make it complicated and say, oh, there's exceptions. She's really trying to
Mhm.
layer that, show
The
that.
origin of the word, and
Yeah.
it kind of explains why it is the way it is.
Yeah,
So if they're presented with a word that they're unfamiliar with, but maybe it has a suffix that they know, like and so they know, oh, that means not, so it's not, and then
Yeah,
try
exactly.
to break it down.
It's like a segmentation,
Yeah.
right, of the words, and then they're isolating sounds, right?
Yeah.
And then they're trying to get them to blend it together.
Like Latin
That's
roots,
the
if you look
big
at
package.
Latin roots like expelled or attractive, looking at those roots in
The
that word.
parts, the
Yeah, and then
things.
being able to depict those.
But that's interesting, because that goes to, like, you said blending, that's phonics.
Yeah.
I mean, so even here, I mean,
It's cropping
it-
up again.
it's cropping up again.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
you
down to
know, on
phonics.
the National Spelling Bee, the kids always ask for the origin of the word,
Exactly.
because the
Mhm.
origin of the word tells you so much about the way it's
Yeah,
spelled, so
and
it
if-
makes sense.
Instead of ignoring those and teaching them, they are able to find that, so.
Gets back to the Latin and the Greek roots
Yeah.
and how important.
French, yeah.
And the French.
So, do we want to move on to comprehensions? Who, let's see,
We can roll back movies, last five, I think, or
Yeah.
six.
that's 5. You want to roll?
Can I say one more thing about vocab? I
Yeah.
found this one kind of interesting. She said, teach multiple meanings of the same word to young children, which we have learned here, that it deepens and broadens students' knowledge to know there's more than one type of a bat, or,
Yeah.
a ball can be used in a different sense. And typically, children find that very entertaining, and it does get them kind of thinking about multiple word meanings, so.
I mean, it creates another hook to
A hook, yeah.
connect things with, and then it's also
It
repetition.
does create a connection, yeah.
Links to prior knowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that leads to the difficulties when students don't have that base knowledge.
Yeah.
And one more thing, she actually had some interesting things in here. She said, she found value in teaching idioms, metaphors, and other figures of speech, so that children know that not all language is concrete and literal, and they start to pay attention to oral language and figure out how to give that meaning, what they're hearing. So she says it will help with oral and written language to teach them some of those other concepts.
So, have we missed anything? I think we've kind of like intertwined a lot of this stuff about.
We have, yeah.
Did we do comprehension?
I think we
Yeah.
touched on does,
Oh, we did touch on
we touched
comprehension.
on that a little bit.
Can I,
Increased
Shaywitz has,
vocabulary leads to better
Yeah,
comprehension.
so go ahead and, talk
She-
about that a little bit.
Shaywitz has a list of trouble signs for comprehension. Cause if you're having a kid that won't sit there and read for you, it's hard to get an assessment off of them, but this is like other clues. So he doesn't seem to get much from his reading. She has trouble answering what was the book about, doesn't enjoy reading, spends the same amount of time on easy passages as he or she does on difficult ones. Doesn't finish what he's beginning to read, unable to relate her readings to things that she knows, trouble drawing inferences, makes literal interpretations, so that gets back to the idioms, and then is unable to summarize main ideas, trouble making predictions for the future, which is like the higher up on Bloom's taxonomy, right? And then just avoids reading.
My author also touched on comprehension, and basically, or the authors, there are two, excuse me, there are individual differences in development of phonological, orthographic, and morphological skills needed for reading and spelling. And that's with people with or without dyslexia. People are gonna have different developments of those different aspects of needed for reading and spelling. So structure needs to be tailored for each of the three kinds of linguistic awareness, and it needs to be student-centered. So reading comprehension is dependent on a student's own understanding of the structure of language, and that may be very different for one student and another student, regardless of if they have dyslexia or not. But dyslexic students, they have to be taught, for example, not to skip words or guess the identity from context. Like when you're reading a novel or something and you see a word, you know, in order to read quickly, we make predictions about what's coming next.
Mhm.
But if a student who is learning to read makes an incorrect prediction or skips words, then their comprehension isn't going to be there. So we have to make sure that the authors, you know, want to make sure that the students are reading the sentence using good phrasing and having attention to punctuation, and prosody if they're to develop fluency and good comprehension skills. And then the book also offers some teaching tips. So Teach for Oral Reading Fluency has students read aloud each day to check for comprehension and decoding skills, and also give them opportunities for independent reading and ask them questions before they start reading a passage, for example, to kind of prime them for what they need to be, the takeaway they need to be getting from the passage. What are they going to be learning? And integrate reading and writing.